how much does therapy serve and how can it harm? Because, the main criticism is that the therapist is incentivized to keep you coming back.
David Sutcliffe is well known for being Christopher in the TV show The Gilmore Girls.
Christopher?
Thought I'd stop by and surprise the Gilmore Girls.
He is now a psychosomatic therapist focusing on men's issues.
Why do you self-sabotage?
5 relationship rules for men. Is it weak for a man to cry in front of his woman?
There was this video of you doing a podcast with Andrew Tate. Would you call it a psychotherapy session?
I don't see how you can put such importance on how you feel as a man because it makes you non-competitive.
What it does is it brings you into presence. And if we can be present with all that we feel, right, we're much more powerful beings.
One of the things I'm hearing from the somatic therapy is it's really about how the body affects the mind.
I literally wanted to shout from the rooftops, everybody, you're a slave. You have all these feelings inside you. You don't know, you don't understand. You're making decisions about your career and your love life, and it's all unconscious, and you need to know about this. My name is David Sutcliffe. I am a certified core energetics practitioner. So I'm not a licensed therapist, but I did do 5 years of training at the Radical Liveness Institute of Southern California and the Core Energetics Institute of New York. And core energetics is a somatic psychotherapy evolved out of bioenergetics, which a lot of people have heard of. Elliot Hulse pushes bioenergetics quite a bit. And it's a somatic psychotherapy. So it uses different physical techniques like hitting, punching, kicking, breath work to help people feel their feelings, essentially. And the idea is that we have feelings that are held back, locked in our body, and that causes us problems in our lives. We're holding back. And it also creates cognitive distortions, of course, because our mindset becomes set up around not wanting to feel these feelings. So the invitation that my work asks is, what is it that you're unwilling to feel? I got into that. I was always into therapy from the time I was a kid, actually. I watched a Woody Allen movie on TV, Manhattan, when I was 12, and there was a scene in a psychiatrist's office, and they were talking about the unconscious. And I was like, what? There's another part of your brain or awareness that you don't know about, and it's controlling things? What? I was just fascinated by that. And started going to therapy in my mid-20s. I knew I was having a lot of fights with my girlfriend. I could see a pattern that I was in. It was the same fight over and over. And I just had this intuitive sense that there was something going on that I didn't understand. And I learned a lot from therapy, talk therapy, but that I was just looking for something deeper. And then I found this core energetics work. And what it did is it allowed me to really feel. Like I started to cry. And it was all spontaneous. And then when I would cry and I would feel these emotions, different thoughts and memories would come up associated with them. And I really started to understand, I have a lot of stuff that's buried and that I didn't even know about. And the intensity of the feelings that were inside me surprised me. And then I did a workshop when I was 35. I used to be an actor. I was in Hollywood for 20 years. Most people know me as Christopher from the Gilmore Girls, very popular television show. And so I had a good run. I far surpassed my wildest dreams. Got on TV, bought a house, was dating pretty girls, the whole thing that you dream of when you start out being an actor. But typical story, I was unsatisfied when I got everything that I wanted. Unhappy, a little depressed. Then I got dumped by my girlfriend. And I don't know, I was just at an impasse. None of it made sense to me. So a friend suggested I go to this retreat. It was in this core energetics therapy. I did and got my mind blown. There was a teacher there named Ann Bradney, and she worked in a way that I just was fascinated by. And I don't know why, who knows why we're drawn or attracted to the things that we're attracted to, but my entire focus became about that work. So I ended up joining her school. I was still acting at the time, but it was starting to wind down. Maybe because Hollywood wasn't interested in me, or maybe I wasn't interested in Hollywood anymore. I'm not sure, but my focus was going in a different direction. And joined her training program and then graduated and slowly started running my own workshops. And people started saying, hey man, I think, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You're really good at this. So ultimately I retired from acting, and now this is what I do full time.
So core energetics, is that's a type of somatic therapy, or somatic therapy is a type of core energetics, or they're kind of the same thing?
No, there's different types of somatic therapy. So somatic experience is a type of somatic therapy. That's the most common, the most popular one. What you're seeing in breath work, like breath work has become very popular, at least here in Austin. And that's a somatic technique. Basically, the idea is bypass the rational mind and get into the body, because the body is where the feelings are, and we need to lose control to really allow ourselves to feel. The mind is very tricky. The mind doesn't want to feel. The mind does not want to confront its fear. The mind does not want to feel pain, and it's always going to talk you out of it, rationalize, create all kinds of stories about whatever to avoid having to feel. So if you go into the body, you're going to feel. I mean, everybody knows this. If you start hitting a punching bag and let out some sound and start to growl, shit's going to start to come out. You're going to start to feel your anger, and it may surprise you. So it's basically using the body to get to the unconscious mind. The idea being that feelings and impulses are in some sense locked in our body. That, it's a metaphor, but they're held, right? So an example might be if you were the sixth born child of two very overwhelmed parents, probably didn't get the attention that you needed. And maybe you were running around reaching for mommy and mommy was too busy. And you can't just continually reach out. It's too painful to have to be longing for an impulse and then not have it met. So you end up sort of giving up, and you'll collapse on yourself. And then what you'll do is you'll create tension across your shoulders to stop yourself from reaching. And that becomes like a physical pattern. And so you can actually read people's bodies and get a sense of what happened to them. Maybe not specifically, but you can get an idea of what happened to them. So there's a famous book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's become the Bible for a lot of therapists now. And it's essentially about that, and it charts all the science, and it's, I mean, for me, it's my training was practical, academic in some way. I mean, we certainly read a lot of books, but it was really more experiential. So it was going into the room over and over and over again, and doing the work, taking risks, feeling your feelings, getting into conflict. I mean, the group dynamic becomes very powerful because, of course, it's a microcosm for your world. So your mother's in the group, your father's in the group, the girl who broke your heart is in the group. I mean, they're not literally there, but they're there as representatives, or you find yourself triggered or annoyed by somebody, and you have the space to go into it. And of course, when you do, you discover that it's very often not about what it's about. It's about other things. It's connected to your past, to your history. And that, for me, that information, when I discovered it, I felt like I found the key to the kingdom. And I literally wanted to shout from the rooftops. It's like, everybody, you're a slave. You have all these feelings inside you. You don't know, you don't understand. You're making decisions about your career and your love life, and it's all unconscious, and you need to know about this. And so I actually made a documentary about this work. 11-part series that lives online called Group docuseries. And, here's the issue with the work. It looks weird because you're hitting and you're kicking, and it's just, you see those old videos that were taken at the Esalen Institute. Maybe you haven't, but some people have. of people, writhing on the floor and screaming, and it looks very hippie. And it is that. But I hope that I'm sort of the bridge. I'm a normal dude. I was an actor. I'm kind of a jock guy. And I certainly have that hippie side to me. But what I'm trying to do is bring this work more into the mainstream, and teach it to people, show it to people in a way that hopefully that they can understand, digest, relate to. And what I'm saying is more and more people are open to it more than ever.
So I should probably establish how we got in touch. Basically, there was this video of you, I guess, doing a podcast with Andrew Tate, or would you call it a psychotherapy session, or what would you call that?
Well, we had done a podcast 3 years previous, and Andrew had put out a tweet. He wasn't really that, he was a little famous, but certainly not the way he is now. He put out a tweet and said, I'm open to doing podcasts and interviews. And it was during COVID, and I just started a podcast. So I reached out to him. I said, hey man, I'm a psychotherapist, and why don't you come on my podcast and I'll psychoanalyze you. And he was like, that sounds great. That sounds fun. I'm up for it. So we did. And it ended up being, for a lot of his fans, their favorite podcast. And he later messaged me and said that it was his favorite interview. I didn't quite know why. I mean, I think it's not so much the therapeutic part of it. I didn't, as a therapist, your job is not to judge people, right? You're just asking questions from a place of neutrality, essentially. And I don't think he'd experienced that before, right? Like, it was always some kind of conflict, and he would say these crazy things, and I'd just be like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's interesting. And so it gave him more and more permission to keep going. And so I think that's why the podcast was so popular. I did drill down on a few things, but he enjoyed it. We enjoyed it. We had a connection. And then after he blew up, just before he got canceled, he reached out to me and said, I'm getting all these requests for podcasts, but I want to do an interview with you. And I was like, okay, great. It's the most famous guy on the planet right now. It was kind of an exciting opportunity. But then he got canceled off social media like 2 days later, and then I never heard back from him. So I just waited and I waited and I waited, and then he went to prison, and then he got out. And then I watched a couple of the interviews after he got out, and I had an instinct. It's like, I can get something out of him. So I reached out to him. I said, hey, how about that interview? And he said, absolutely. And so I flew out to Romania 2 weeks later, and we did this interview. I would say, was it a therapy session? Yeah, in some way. I mean, it's not a typical therapy session. Obviously, it's performative in some way. We're doing it for the cameras. He's aware. I'm aware. We know that we need, on some level, to tell a story. He's a performer. I'm a performer. So we know we had to make it interesting, and he went along. I mean, this is what I'll say, because people said, oh, he was, he's really defended. I mean, people have all kinds of opinions, obviously, about that interview, but I felt like he gave me a ton of openings. Like, he said things, or sitting across from him, he felt on one level, very open to me. And so I felt the permission to go in. And I was, it didn't really happen until the end. I mean, there was a few moments but it really wasn't until the end where I really came with the full force of my analysis, let's say.
The way we got in touch was that I had written a Substack article critiquing some of the things you said, but with the acknowledgement that okay, this is clearly a podcast. It's clearly two interesting people trying to make an interesting piece of content. However, here would be my critiques if this is what a standard psychotherapy session looked like. Anyways, you reached out really nicely and said, hey,
right. Somebody, a fan of yours who I know, said, hey, you might want to read this. and he's great. He's a big fan of yours, loves your YouTube videos. And maybe you guys, he was the one who suggested it. Maybe you guys should have a conversation about it. And I read it, and then I watched a couple of your videos, and I saw this, I thought you were great. And so, yeah, I reached out, and listen, I'm interested in people's criticisms of psychotherapy. I think a lot of them are legitimate. I think the profession that I am in has a lot of blind spots, and I think there's a lot of bad therapists. And I think, I hope, and I know, because he said so, Andrew learned some things from me, but I certainly learned some things from him. His perspective has a lot of power. And so I don't discount it. And I don't discount like some of the things that you said in your criticism. I mean, they're interesting. They're valid points, and they're worth debating, or at least having a conversation about. But yeah. I mean, and I have some thoughts. I mean, obviously. But here's the thing: I have my own bias, right? Like we all have our bias. Of course, I've seen things, I've done things. I've spent the last 15 years doing this work. I have a lens. I can't not have that lens. I get a lot of supervision. I try to think about it and talk about it, but to make sure that I'm as clean as possible. But it's not a thing. There's no human being that doesn't have blind spots, especially when you're deeply involved in one area of study. So.
Yeah, well, two things I was going to say is I do think that was probably his, because I've seen a couple of his videos, of the Andrew Tate videos, and your interview with him was definitely the most interesting one. So in terms of making a super interesting piece of content, y'all totally did. And then the other thing is, as we talked about before, we had a Zoom call before this, and I think we're going to agree on most things, and it'll just be like, it's going to be almost like two like low carb dieters disagreeing on which is the best supplement, something like that. Because one of the things I'm hearing from the somatic therapy is it's really about how the body, the physiological state affects the mind, and maybe vice versa, right? It's kind of bidirectional. And that is something that I experienced for myself very clear. I mean, I knew of the concept. I knew that if you exercise a lot, that's good for depression. So clearly there's some kind of connection. But I experienced it very clearly for myself when I did a lot of deep meditation, of just almost to the point where I could see, and this is going to sound kind of strange, but when you get into these really deep meditative states, things get very clear, like almost to the point where if I felt my shoulders kind of clench up, I could see the flavor of my thoughts just change into this more kind of nervous, worrying type mental patterns. But then if I could relax that, it was more of these kind of carefree kind of mental patterns and thoughts.
Yeah, I guess it's about the orientation and how much does therapy serve, and how can it harm, I think is a legitimate question, because the main criticism is that the therapist is incentivized to keep you coming back. So there may be an unconscious bias that the therapist has to look for problems.
There's tons of different therapists with tons of different approaches. So it's hard to say like this therapist said that and then say, okay, therefore all therapists take that approach. So, which is definitely not the case. But there was this one video with a psychotherapist saying something like the real therapy starts after 2 years. So like the first 2 years is like rapport building. And then once you have a trusted connection, then you can start the real therapy. And I'm thinking like, wow, 2 years, like what, how have you not finished the like mind excavating process by then? And so with that, with the concept of the unconscious, of there's this unconscious, and we can look at, say, slips of the tongue or look at dreams to learn more about the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the unconscious is, affecting our conscious processes, but it is unverifiable how deep the unconscious is by the definition that it's unconscious, right? Then it kind of sounds like, then how would you ever know if you're finished? Right? You're digging through a black box, but you don't know the contents of that black box. So then theoretically, you'd never finish digging, or you could never know that you've finished digging.
It's turtles all the way down. There's no end. I mean, when I graduated from my training program, I'm like, I'm still crazy. What the fuck? You know, like, I learned a lot, and I'm definitely different and better than I was, but I'm still, you know, have issues. And I realized, like, that's what it is. Like, I think the end game is accepting your humanity. I mean, that's what I'm trying to teach. I'm not trying to cure anybody. I'm not trying to fix anybody. I don't have that mindset. I want people to just be more aware of what's happening for them, to make the unconscious conscious as much as they can, give them strategies in the situations that continually cause them distress, and help them understand what it might actually be about. Because what happens is we tend to judge ourselves for our bad behavior, whether that's addiction, whether that's procrastination, whether that's getting involved in bad relationships. There's something wrong with me. And that conclusion is a self-fulfilling prophecy, obviously. So what I'm trying to teach people is that there is a reason that you are exhibiting these behaviors, this pattern. It's a response to pain, a response to trauma that you're not aware of. And it's a survival strategy. It was the only thing you could do at a time when you were vulnerable and helpless. You had no other choice. So therefore, it was the right choice in that moment. However, that choice, which we've become very attached to, it feels like who we are. Our entire identity and belief system is wrapped up in it. That choice is not serving you anymore. So how can we help you make a different choice? Now, that is not an easy thing to get somebody to do, to let go of everything that's known and enter into the unknown and try, establish new belief systems, take more risks, because they're going against everything that they've learned. And to me, that's what therapy is about. It's just that. And there's no end to it. There's no place where you're fully healed, you're fully evolved, where you're never triggered again, you never have any problems. It's just giving people a set of tools and skills that when those moments come, they're less reactive. They spend less time down, agitated, collapsed, whatever it is, and that they're not judging themselves, or alternatively judging somebody else, right? It's either somebody else's fault, they're bad, or I'm bad. And really, it's all neutral, right? An event happens. We have a response to it, some emotional response, feeling, sensation in the body. Then the mind attempts to make sense of it in order to give ourselves a feeling of control. That's, of course, an illusion, but that's the best thing that we can do, because we don't want to feel what is coming up inside us. So what I'm helping people do is just to say, you can tolerate your feelings, right? Like you can, maybe you got your heart broken. Maybe your mother was cruel or uncaring or unfeeling, and you didn't get the love you wanted from her, or the love that you wanted to give her wasn't received. And in some way your heart got broken. And so you don't trust love. And, to a child, that's devastating. And so what you're trying to teach the adult is that you can risk reaching out for love, and you may get your heart broken. You probably will get your heart broken, but it's okay. You can tolerate that. You as an adult can tolerate getting your heart broken. The child in the unconscious doesn't believe that. It's like, I never want to feel this fucking pain ever again. Right? And so it's going to do anything it can, all kinds of tricky ways to avoid getting us to do that, like dating somebody who's the wrong person. We date somebody who's unavailable, right? So Well, they're not available, so I don't have to risk getting my heart broken. Long distance relationship, whatever. There's all kinds of strategies so we can avoid it. And so that's really all I'm trying to teach people. I'm trying to repattern them in some sense.
Seems like the big thing is acceptance of these dominoes fell to make me the way I am. And how should I put it? And so by analyzing those, the dominoes that preceded everything that is happening now, I can get a better understanding of the truth of how I am now. So I can get a better understanding of what do I need to, maybe are you trying to look for how the person's identity and behavior patterns are constructed so then you can change those behavior patterns to something that is more productive or more helpful for them or something like that?
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. Awareness is the first step. You want to make them aware of their pattern, and they don't want to become aware of it, right? It's easier to blame the other person. Like, I keep dating assholes. I keep dating crazy women, and at a certain point, and my therapist said this to me, it's like, why do you keep dating crazy women, quote unquote, crazy women? Why is that? That's a choice that you're making. Now, it wasn't really a choice that I was making because it was unconscious, but once I became conscious of it, now it's a choice. Right? So people say, oh, you're choosing this, you're choosing addiction, you're choosing to procrastinate. Yes, but if you're unaware of the mechanism in your mind that is driving you towards that behavior, which is very compulsive, it's not really a choice. So this is how I think about it. So the awareness brings about the ability to make a different choice. Now, the defense or the resistance, it's still there. So we still have to work with the defense and the resistance. And so then I'm trying to teach people the mechanism of that. And that can get more complicated because the resistance and the defense is very tricky. And it will make itself manifest in all kinds of ways. So you go out with this, perfect, okay, I finally found the perfect woman. Her toes are just a little weird. I don't know. I'm not something, your mind will find something to fixate on so that you can get out of the situation so that you don't have to be vulnerable and risk getting your heart broken. And so, it's just little things like that. You're helping them become aware of and also just helping them come into reality about what happened to them as children, not to have them indulge in the feeling. But if we've been abused by our parents in some way, physically, emotionally, if we were betrayed, something happened to us, we have a right to be angry about it. And here's the thing, the organism that we are will respond to oppression with rage. That's just the organism. That's what it will do. Now, if you're a 6-year-old and your mother or father is screaming at you all the time or hitting you, reacting with rage is going to make it worse. So you're going to suppress that rage and you're going to develop some other strategy to avoid that behavior, or avoid being subject to that behavior. But that rage is inside you. And it's going to come out somehow, some way, probably in some future relationship, or, you're playing sports and all of a sudden you're beating the shit out of somebody. Something is going to happen, right? And we all know these parts of ourselves where we're in traffic and we just lose our fucking mind. What is that? Well, what I'm helping people do is reclaim that. Like, come in here and you can have all of your rage, all of your anger, feel it. Say all the things you wanted to say to your father. Fuck you, you fucking asshole. You're a weak fucking man. You were never there for me, whatever. You want to act out killing him, murdering him, have at it. Whatever your body wants to do, let it do it. Obviously we're in a safe, contained way. We use pillows. We have techniques for it. But people, that's what happened to me. My first time I went to a week-long group therapy retreat, I acted out killing my mother. Now, it sounds crazy, right? But I didn't know that level of rage was inside me. It wasn't a performance. I was an actor. I know what a fucking performance is. This came out of me. completely shocked me, the intensity of the feeling that I had. And then it took me right to my pain, right? Right to this place where I felt unseen, unloved by my mother. I then turned that into a story. I'm unlovable. I'm not enough. And then spent the rest of my life trying to figure out a way to win the love of my mother. And so I became an actor and got famous. And it didn't work. And that started me on this journey. But that's just a kind of, an example.
A lot of it makes sense, all that right there. One thing I'm thinking of, though, is how often is the therapist, let's say, kind of checking the patient on their interpretation? So, for example, and bear with me if this sounds, I'm not trying to mock the process at all. I'm just trying to...
No, they're great questions. You're asking great questions.
Okay. And I'm thinking, for example, like, let's say someone says, I sense I have a lot of hangups, or I feel like I have some sort of trauma because my brother was mean to me when I was a kid. And then let's say, would the therapist jump straight into like, okay, what were the emotions you felt when he was being mean to you? What was the worst thing that he did? Tell me more about that. Or are they going to, at some point in the process, say, well, were you an annoying kid? Like, was it possible that his meanness was appropriate to your provocation? You know what I mean? It sounds kind of like almost like you're blaming the victim, but at some point I think that could be necessary, because if they just say my brother was mean to me, but then they don't stop to take a moment to dig in, it was just like your brother saying like, don't come in my room because you have sticky hands and you're going to get all my stuff dirty and I don't like that, so stay out of my room. But then maybe the kid at the time just interprets that as oh, he hates me and why doesn't anybody like me? You see what I mean? And I'm not trying to downplay any cases where it's like very clear, obvious abuse, but I'm just saying, like, are there certain times when the patient could just use some checking and it could be like, well, let's take a look. What did you do? What did he do? Okay, does that make you feel a little less oppressed?
Listen, the whole name of the game is, from my perspective, self-responsibility. That's where I'm trying to lead people to. So once this person comes in the room, once I killed my mother, for instance, okay, I get that energy out of me. Now I know that. I've exercised that part of me. I felt my pain. I have an understanding of what happened. I can spend the rest of my life blaming my mother for all my problems, right? And maybe I have a legitimate grievance around that. But at a certain point, it's like, that's what happened. That's what happened to you. There's no right or wrong to it. It just exists. It just is. These are the feelings you had about it. Fair enough. But now you're here and you've got to accept what happened to you. You've got to grieve the loss of what you longed for and didn't get. You've got to mourn it. You've got to let it go, and you've got to take responsibility, right? So if I spend the rest of my life being angry at my mother or angry at women because of what happened to me with my mother, that's on me. Now, I think where it gets sticky is if you don't know that's why you're angry at women. Like, if you have no connection between those two things, you're kind of in a hell, because you just don't know what's going on and you're stuck in the resentment. So, and a lot of people who come to me, that's where they are. They're stuck in resentment. They're stuck in blame. It's somebody else's fault, my mom, my dad. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is essentially, in some way, it's really simple. Everybody needs their feelings validated. I understand why you felt that way. I get it. That makes sense to me. That affirmation is so important, especially if they've never gotten that before. Because in the absence of their feelings being affirmed, they conclude that there's something wrong with themselves. And so you want to take that off. Now, there may be something wrong with them, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them on a deep level, like I'm defective, I'm bad, right? There's different that I have quirks that can be annoying, or I was an aggressive kid and I provoked my mother. That's different than I'm fundamentally at my core bad and unlovable. And you would be surprised at how many people are walking around with that belief? I would say most people. It's unconscious, but there's I think a place inside many of us that is scared to show all of who we are, because we think that if we show that, we'll be rejected. We won't be loved. Most of us are hiding something. Why are you hiding? What is it you're hiding? You must be something that you feel shame about. Where did that shame come from? Why do you feel ashamed about that? What is that? What is the story you tell yourself about that shame? That's the matrix that I'm trying to help people unpack.
I see. One thing on the affirming feelings is I would kind of think that there are some feelings or some conclusions that someone might make at an early stage in their development that don't make any sense, that are actually pathological, or they are not, let's say, an appropriate feeling in the sense that it is not a feeling that helps them. So just to give you an example, I was looking at this video between, I don't know if he was a psychotherapist, I think, or a clinician, but talking with someone in his community who was having issues. And it's one of these things where you have a live session and then they can talk and explore the situation. Anyways, the guy clearly had a very difficult childhood, and his mother was incredibly overbearing, berating him for like hours a day. And then the minimum, the average was an hour a day. He was being berated for how useless he is. And he even kept a diary of this, like a journal, like, okay, today was an hour. Yesterday was 45 minutes. So he had a pretty rough situation. And the, let's say the therapist asked him about that, asked him about how he felt about that. They started talking about suicide. And then he said things like, the therapist said something like, "I'm surprised you're still here." As in, I'm surprised you didn't commit suicide. Mm-hmm. And so I could tell that was a type of empathy and a type of, I see how you arrived at that thought process. But I was thinking, is that really helpful to say, like, the logical conclusion from this sequence of events is that you should kill yourself? I know this is an extreme example, but
no, it's a good example. What you're affirming, yes, it makes no sense, but that's it made sense to the child. And so you're affirming that logic pattern because otherwise they feel insane. It needs to be seen. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be known in that way. And what it does is it relaxes them. Here's the thing. We all long to be seen. We want to be understood. We want to be known. And what happens very often with children, it certainly happened with me, things are happening in your environment. You can't make sense of them. And you're alone with all of those feelings. You're 4 years old, you're 6 years old, you're 8 years old, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. All children are essentially narcissists. So they make it about themselves. They don't have the discernment to say, oh, mom has issues and I'm not going to take this personally. They can't not take it personally. So what you're trying to do is affirm the feeling without agreeing with the story, right? So somebody will come in and they'll say, this happens all the time, right? They're talking about their husband and their wife and how horrible they are. And you're listening and you're like, yeah, maybe she's horrible, but maybe you're also contributing to this, right? But you can't lead with that. You have to let them discharge their frustration. And you have to develop connection and safety with them. And the way to do that is to say, I can understand why you'd feel that way. I'm not agreeing with the story. I'm not saying, it sounds like your wife's a fucking bitch. I'm saying I can understand why you'd feel that way. That must have been painful. I can imagine you were scared, whatever it is. You're just affirming the feeling without agreeing to this with their interpretation of the story. And once that trust and safety is developed, they call it unconditional positive regard. It's from that place that you can then lead them into a deeper level of awareness and say, well, how are you contributing to this? You know, what are you seeing this clearly? Maybe there's something from your history that's being projected onto this situation because, you know, when you told me about your wife doing this thing, I didn't see it the same way that you described it. So I wonder if there's some distortion that you have, and maybe we could explore that. It's things like that. But at the beginning, we just need our feelings affirmed. I mean, that's what I want. You know, when I'm upset about something, I just want to fucking rant for 5 or 10 minutes and just have a person, guy's an asshole. Totally. I'm like, fuck yeah, you know, and then I calm down. I'm like, all right, fuck, okay. You know, and I bring it back to myself, you know, and I know what I'm doing, right? But the client, they don't know yet. So you're trying to lead them there.
Part of the affirming the feeling process is it gets you on their side as something to let their defense down. And so that's kind of a stepping stone where you're like, okay, I see how the story you had arrived at that feeling. But okay, now that we agree on that, is there a possibility that the story is wrong? Something kind of like that?
The story is always wrong. Your story is wrong. Your mind is a horrible narrator of your own experience. That's the place to start. I mean, that's how I am. When I'm in a fight with my lady, I don't know what's going on. Like if I'm triggered, it's 100% sure that like I don't even know what I said. I don't know what she said. I think I know, but if I'm in my defense, I know that I'm not reliable. The only thing I know is how I feel. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm upset. That's it. Everything else is pretty much nonsense. And that's also what I'm trying to teach people. It's like, just come back to the feeling. That's all you can be certain of. So, but because we're interpreting the story through the lens of our history, and we're very attached to our stories because our stories are belief systems. We have a narrative that's running in our mind all the time. And really, on some level, I think therapy and all spiritual work, whether it's, you know, meditation or whatever, it's about exactly that. It's getting out of the story, getting out of being attached to a particular kind of narrative. I mean, I think we're going through something in the culture right now where the stories that we've been telling ourselves for the last 50 years, people are saying this was all fucking bullshit. What the fuck is going on? And that's why there's a collective like freak out. It's just what happens with a client. It's like when they start to realize that the story they've been telling themselves is wrong, well, they have nothing to hold on to. They don't know what's real anymore. So it's very scary to let go of. Even if that thing they're holding on to is causing them suffering, it's all they know, right? So convincing them to let go of it is not an easy thing. But usually life will force it on you in some way. If you keep wanting to grow and evolve, life is going to show you where your limitations are. Life is going to show you where your map of reality is not accurate, and you're going to keep bumping up against it over and over again until you learn the lesson. And it's all about you, that reality is essentially a projection. It's not out there, it's in here, and then you project it out. So your reality, as Tate said perfectly, it's just a mirror for your inner world. And once people understand that, then they come back to self-responsibility. And you know, ultimately what happened with your mother and your father ultimately is irrelevant. But if you're attached unconsciously to the story of it, it's not irrelevant at all. It's everything. And until you understand that and liberate yourself from that, you're a slave to those feelings. You're acting unconsciously. You're not truly free. Now, can you actually get free? The Matrix movie, I think the conclusion was you get out of one matrix, you're in another. It's continual matrices forever. And so all you can do is just accept. Okay, this is what it is. Love and accept, which is the message of Christ, right? Like love, war, peace, tenderness, mayhem, violence. It's all, I just have to learn to be with it all. That ultimately is the highest level of consciousness. And so can we give that to ourselves? Can we accept ourselves in our own beauty, but also our own ugliness? Can we accept the madness that lives inside us and see the goodness of it? Because there's really no way really out of it. And in fact, there's great gifts in it.
It's matrices all the way down, Right. I like that.
Exactly.
One of the things I liked about Buddhism is the fact that suffering is a baked in part of reality, such that you shouldn't expect it to ever be gone. So the fact that it's there should not indicate to you that something needs to be fixed. It's like, oh, I'm feeling anxious today. Was like, well, you probably feel anxious every day when you're working on something, you're doing something new, you're doing your work. If it's difficult, there's going to be some level of anxiety. There's nothing pathological about it. You don't have to go and fix yourself. So like realizing that is very valuable. Like we said, there's all kinds of different types of therapy. There's different types of therapists, and one therapist will do one type of therapy in a different way. But I was thinking, depending on the way in which the therapist questions the patient or leads them to investigate their childhood, could it be done in a way such that the question turns into kind of a suggestion? Like if you're asking, were there any things your parents did that hurt you? Then that could have them say, oh, I never thought about it like that. Let me search for ways that my parents hurt me. So I'm wondering if there's two, and if you're saying like, what are the ways your parents hurt you? But then you're also saying, what are the things you're grateful for that your parents did? Then there's a kind of balance. My kind of worry is it too often the case that it's let's look for any transgressions and let's work from there. So then the person's interpretation of their past is kind of unbalanced to be, let's say, ungrateful for or resentful for more than the reality would suggest is warranted.
Yeah. Well, I think that it can be a trick of the mind to continue to come back to that. I hear exactly what you're saying. I think the blind spot is that you're projecting your own stuff onto your clients. That's really the danger. Because none of us are perfectly conscious. That's why most therapists do, and if they don't, they should get supervision. So if you're trying to make sure that you're as clean as you can possibly be, and that is a problem, right? That and I saw it in the interview with Tate. I mean, when I watched it, I was like, I'm projecting. Like, and it's fine because I let it all go. Like if I make a suggestion and he doesn't bite, I don't necessarily push unless I feel that there's an opening. And the way that I knew that I had created safety with him is that he stayed with me through it, right? Like, so he was present in his way through all of it. And there kept being invitations.
Yeah, it never looked like you made him uncomfortable.
Exactly. And you're always because you have to stay in connection, right? Like you have to stay in some way in favor and be garnering their trust, but also challenging, especially for a guy like Tate. He wants to feel challenged, right? That's exciting to him. Listen, people come into my office all the time and say, I said, well, tell me about your childhood. And they're like, my childhood was great. No problem. And I'm like, okay. I don't like really. I'm like, okay. Like, and then I'm, well, what's going on? Well, this and that and da-da-da-da. And they'll tell me their whole story. And then eventually, I'll ask them a little, well, what happened, with growing up? And they'll tell me a story and I'll be like, what? I said, wow, that sounds like kind of traumatic to me, because something that they just lived with it. They dealt with it. They moved on. And it makes sense that they don't want to make it tragic because it was so painful. They want to disassociate from it. Now, I'm not trying to, maybe I am. I'm sure I am actually like making hypnotic suggestions. It's sort of what you're suggesting. But hopefully I'm doing, in a way that's leading to some kind of truth. I mean, they're very vulnerable and you have a lot of power over them and you have to take that with a lot of responsibility. And I guess what the skill is attunement. And it's, sometimes you can just feel when somebody's like not in the truth. it's a vibe. And it's like you both know that they're lying, and not lying, but that they're in some kind of distortion, and you just want to meet them there. And I think the thing is, you just hold it lightly, and you really be soft and tender. But I think you're right. It's a good question to ask, because I think it's really, really tricky. And it's very important that therapists do not oppose or impose an agenda onto their clients, whether it's just to feel useful, because I want to be a good therapist and I want to keep this client and I want them to like me and I want them to think that I know what I'm doing. Or we're projecting, as I said earlier, our own unconscious material onto them. So I had issues with my father, and now I'm sitting across from this person and I'm hearing stories about what happened with their father, and I'm relating to it, and then I'm making suggestions about what it may be, but it in fact is related to my own stuff. And that's something that you have to be incredibly mindful about. And I don't think anybody gets it right 100% of the time. It's a tricky thing to navigate.
Yeah, like we're all human, and you can't really compare therapy to, let's say, a pill. Just going back to the Tate thing, for example, we have a recording from different angles, but we're not seeing how he's meeting your gaze, how he's, the kind of subtleties of his body language and how you guys are interacting on that level. So it's kind of not everything is communicated there. So yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. And I would imagine I would imagine most people are not going to therapy thinking that the therapist is going to be like this perfect, like almost like AI avatar that only says the most unbiased, optimally designed questions going in and out.
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, I try to demonstrate my humanity. I was going to say as often as I can, but in appropriate moments, so that they're aware that, I'm a human being. I have my stuff. I don't have it all figured out. I'm just going to try to be a mirror for you. What I'm modeling more is the acceptance of my own humanity. So I'm imperfect, but I continue to do my best to love myself. Despite that, I try to liberate myself from shame, from being too hard on myself. I'm not perfect at it, but here I am, this imperfect person doing my best. And that's all we can do. And so I want to model that behavior for you. The tricky thing, and this is, kind of inside baseball, but it's really interesting, is that, I talked about what we call countertransference, like your stuff that you might put on your client. But what's also happening is they're putting stuff on you. So they're not seeing you. They're seeing their father unconsciously, their, lover, brother. I mean, in my case, I'm a man, so it's these things. Authority. So all of their issues with all of those people in their life are all at some point going to be projected onto you. And so you have to be aware of and hold that projection. You're not in real relationship. You're in relationship, but there's a dynamic that's being created. And so for me, I know that the archetype that I represent for people is the good dad. Whether they're aware of it or not, I'm the good dad. I'm the nice guy. I understand. I get it. I'm also, I work out. I'm kind of cool. So, you know what I mean? I'm accessible. But at the end of the day, I'm the good dad. And sometimes I'm really loving and caring and gentle and understanding. And other times I'm like firm and direct and get your shit together. And I see through your bullshit. Let's go. And that's my... that's the avatar that I work with, because that's just, I got the gray beard, I'm 54. That's what's happening. So you're always using that. And if you use it wisely, you can help people, because, people wanted a good dad.
I think that's really effective, or working in your favor, probably from the perspective of your clients, because you have had some kind of success that most men covet. You were a successful actor. Sounds like you were successful with women. You made a lot of money. So, along with your analytic tool set, there's a bit more trust and kind of like, okay, well, at least this guy is coming from the perspective of someone who knows how to get what I want.
I've lived a life.
Yeah.
I've lived a life, and I've had up and downs and successes and failures. And so there's credibility that exists with my clients for sure. That, I think doesn't necessarily exist with all therapists. I think it's imperative on anybody who's doing what I do to consistently be out doing interesting things, like challenging themselves, like growing, learning. It's just like if you're a teacher at a jiu-jitsu school, if you never get on the mat and roll, well, you're not going to, you're just going to grow old and tired, and you're going to lose credibility with, even if you get out there and get your ass kicked, your students are still going to respect it. They're going to like seeing you in the muck of it. And so I make it a priority. I mean, I do it. I don't do it for my clients. I do it because it's what I'm interested in, right? It's just, so I'm always engaging in all kinds of activities just to keep myself, growing and learning and adapting. So, but yes, that I hope serves as a inspiration for my clients.
I wrote a different article where I forget the title.
I know you're just hammering on therapy all over Substack.
Yeah, I've been.
I wonder why. I wonder what that is. I wonder why you are critical of therapy. That's the question I would ask.
That is a good question. That's a very good question.
Why is your attention focused on that?
I got there it is. Okay, I was looking for my bookshelf for the book, but there was this. A while back, I got into this concept of, it seems like there's this everyone trying to be a victim. It's kind of thing going around. I can't put statistics on it, like what is the percent of people who have gone up in their victimhood mentality. But I got interested in that, and then I bought this book called The Empire of Trauma, and it said something like, the subtext was like a history of victimhood, something like that. So just on the title, I was drawn to that and bought it. And the book actually wasn't necessarily critical of therapy, or it was, if anything, it felt like an academic analysis of like what constitutes trauma, of like how we had shell shock. When shell shock started to become a thing, instead of the people suffering shell shock being met with sympathy and like, okay, we need to get these people help, they were actually kind of like met with suspicion. Be like, oh, you're just trying to get out of your work. So we went from this kind of like a bit too brutal to victims to now I'm wondering if we're getting to be too soft on, let's say, anyone who considers themselves a victim. So I got into that. And then the other thing was, like I told you, through meditation, I started to really experience directly just how connected the body and the mind is. But I also noticed, like, if I was in a certain emotional state, I could get into a certain emotional state via one type of story, but then I could fix that emotional state just by relaxing the body in a certain way. And the mentality and the body are bidirectional, and then they can be positive feedback loops. So for example, your interpretation of things will affect your body and affect your mentality to the degree that it will affect your hormones in a measurable way. So for example, if someone goes into a marathon and they finish second place, but they were aiming for first place, they feel like a loser and their testosterone goes down. But if someone goes into a marathon, they say, I just want to finish this thing. I've never done a marathon. They get 73rd place. They experience an increase in testosterone, even though objectively it's totally different. So then I was thinking about like, well, what if people just didn't think they had trauma? What if they just said, oh, that happened, but I'm not traumatized. That didn't do anything to me. I don't have any issues. I'm not a traumatized person. And then I started reading about this book called, it's in Japanese, but there's an English version. It's The Courage to Be Disliked.
I've read it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's on Alfred Adler's thing, because he basically said trauma doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I feel like maybe that's a bit too much. Maybe it could have been phrased something like trauma doesn't have to exist, something like that. We could get into that in a second. And then from there, I actually got re-interested in the topic. Like I thought I was done after I wrote 2 articles on trauma. Then I wrote a third one because I started looking into testosterone. And so testosterone is very responsive to certain types of supplements and like ice baths or exercise, but it's also responding to how you perceive the world. Like, do you perceive having done this? Do you perceive yourself as being victorious? Like you could do something like for the example of the marathon, where one person feels like because they got that result, they feel like a loser, but another person, because they got that result, they feel like a winner. And you have totally different changes in testosterone. And so then that's why I wrote that. I don't know if you saw that one where I was talking about how like perhaps some types of therapy are a feminine solution to a masculine problem because men have 10 times the testosterone of women. They have 4 times less estrogen. They have 4 times less oxytocin. So they have different responses to certain types of approaches of solving problems. It's like a problem-focused coping strategy versus emotional coping strategy.
No, that's great. That's really interesting. Adam Lane Smith. Do you know this guy? He's a psychotherapist, and he talks a lot about this stuff, and that the approach to therapy with men and women should be different, and it's very often not, because most therapists and so most teachers of therapy are women, and so there's a bias, of course. And I experienced that bias at the school that I was in. And, during the second year, I called it out. I'm like, this school is feminized. You don't understand men. You have a bias against men. I'm a kind of jockey guy, and you put judgments on me. I feel it. I don't like it. And they didn't like that, obviously. But they started to sense that was true. So yeah, it's a great topic. And I made a video about this. If you have a limited amount of money and it's between therapy and jujitsu, you should do jujitsu. You're probably going to get more benefit from it. You're going to get in your body. You're going to have a community. You're going to, work towards achieving higher levels, which is going to make you feel good. And all my clients, I insist, particularly the men, but the women as well, that you have to be moving your body. You have to be working out. You have to be challenging yourself. That's where the action is. What I'm trying to help them with is, why are you not doing that? What is the resistance to that? And I think the other side of it, and let me just say, this idea about when the feminine is approach to therapy is very understanding. Of course, it's feminine. That's what they're there to do, to be understanding and nurturing. But there's a blind spot in that. And so I think men need to be challenged. Men need to be confronted. I think they also need understanding and compassion. And I think there's a lot of power when it can come from a man. But if I'm in understanding without being in challenge, I don't think it's very effective. And that's something that I had to learn, because I was trained by a woman and she was a master. I mean, her work was amazing. It took me some time to realize that I had it was a blind spot, and it's only really in the last 5 or 6 years where I've activated some of these strategies and become more confronting with my clients, because I think in the culture, you're right, there is this predilection to, it's very attractive to be a victim. And my problems are not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. I'm being oppressed by whoever, and I just get to blame them for it and not have to take responsibility. And really what I'm teaching is the exact opposite of that. I just have a different way in. But all the things you're saying, I think are right. There's other layers that my work would bring to that. But the basic premise of what you're saying, I think is correct and wise and useful.
I really like what you said about the if you had a choice between jujitsu and therapy and you're limited on money and time, that's a good point. Going back to the point of you have achieved some success. And so men, when they're coming to your therapy, they probably look up to you to some degree. And another thing I was thinking about is, are men going to be less receptive to a therapist if they can't look up to the therapist, don't have some sort of respect for what they've come to do? Like, would that be a difference between a man and a woman? Like, do you think women would be as concerned about, like, okay, where does this person come from? What did they do? What did they achieve? Or is she just thinking, how does this therapist make me feel?
I don't want to make too many generalizations and get myself into trouble here, but I've been in a lot of therapy groups with women where I'm like one of the only men, and it's a lot of talking. That was very annoying to me. And I had to realize that women process their emotions in a different way than men do, because when I have a men's group, there's talking. But if somebody is going on, one of the men's going to be like, dude, you're going to get called out. And they don't let them go on. And there's a lot more action. There's a lot more of the somatic stuff. The guys want to get up and they want to hit. They want to feel. They want to express. It's more dynamic. And so, yeah, men and women, they have different needs, different approaches. And if you're coming to me, you kind of, know what you're getting. And I work with a lot of women, and I love working with women, and I probably work with them in a different way, but just as a father would treat his son and daughter differently and offer them different things, it's really the same thing. I don't know if that's exactly an answer to your question, but
I think that's a good rule of thumb. Like, men shouldn't be talking too much. Like, the talking should be at some point translate into some kind of action, right? Yeah. Like, it can't just be talking the whole time. And I think that's why people get irritated with, maybe they'll have a friend who comes to them with a problem, and then they're like, okay, yeah, let's talk about it. And then the conversation comes to a resolution, and then they have the conversation again, the exact same conversation. And the guy's like, wait, did you do the thing that we agreed would be the best course of action? It's like, well, no. It's like, well, then why are you talking to me again?
Men, I think, David Tate, he's a famous writer about men's work, I guess you'd call it. And he said that women grow through understanding and compassion, and men grow through challenge. Again, maybe that's a generalization, but it's an interesting perspective. And I think it's true. I didn't get enough of that at the school that I went to. I wish I had been challenged more by men, and even the men that were there were kind of feminized in a way. So I didn't really get what I needed. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm the man here now. Like, it's not, which was actually perfect for me because my dad wasn't around. And so I was longing for this man. Like, where's the man to help me, to straighten me out, to support me, to show me the way? And I was left with, you're the man. Like, you're going to have to do that on your own. You're going to have to figure this out. This is what it is. And that was perfect. That was like it was the exact lesson that I needed. But what I had to do was feel the disappointment, right? To feel the disappointment that I wanted my father there, and he wasn't there. And I was searching for him everywhere without even knowing it. And when he wasn't there, I was angry at the women, my mother / and playing that out over and over and over again, until I finally just let myself feel that, how much I longed for my father. I mean, and that's, and I'll just tangent off this a little bit because I think it's interesting. I had an experience I killed my mother in my first workshop. And then the second one, I went in, I did this work on my father, and I got into some anger, but it didn't feel entirely authentic. And then the woman leading had me pick somebody in the room that reminded me of my father. So I did, and it was this man, and she said, okay, let him hold you. And I was like, okay. And so like he held me like a child, like a baby. And so now I'm lying there, I'm looking up into his eyes. And I don't care who you are, like when you're in that position, like you kind of feel regressed, like something happens inside you. And because we're in the workshop and it's in that environment, suddenly I started just sobbing, and in a way that was not just crying, like my body started to shake, and uncontrollable, that kind of sobbing. And suddenly I had this thought, which was, he never saw me play. I played hard for him. And it just came out of me. Now, my dad was a hockey player. I was also a hockey player. Not a professional, but a semi-pro. And I, in my mind as a child, that's what my dad was. And I was a pretty decent hockey player myself, but I played like a fucking animal. Like I was notorious for being like a little crazy and super competitive. And in this moment where I let myself feel the pain, the memory came. He never saw me play. That was not a conscious thought that I'd ever had. I didn't know that was the source of this pain that I had, and that I played hard for him. So that, rocked my life. It's like, what else am I doing to win the love of my father? Is my life my own? I've been walking around with this buried in my psyche, this pain, this anger, this disappointment, and I didn't even know about it. And it's been in some way guiding my life. So I think a lot of men are walking around with that kind of pain and doing a lot of things unconsciously to win the love of their father, win the approval of their mother. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as Tate suggested. And he's got a point, right? Like, your job is to please the father in some way. Like, it's built in, right? Like, we all want to please our father, so that there must be an evolutionary purpose to that. Therefore, it can't necessarily be bad. But if we're doing it from a place of, I'm not enough, I have no value, and I'm going to, pursue this thing, make $1 million, become super successful, whatever it is, whatever in my mind will equal success, so that I can, that's where we get into some distortions, because you're trying to solve a problem in a way that is not actually going to solve that problem, right? And we all run into this. So making, that kind of discovery, I think, is extremely valuable.
Mm-hmm. And when you had this realization of, I'm doing all these, a lot of my life may be led by the fact that I'm trying to please my father, did that allow you to, just having that realization, did it kind of like, let's say, make your mind more malleable to where you're able to be like, okay, that's why I have this behavior pattern. That's why I have this behavior pattern. Now I can start crafting these in a better way because I understand it.
All kinds of, things started to make sense. Things started to fall into place. And I started to understand myself and what I was doing in a much different way. So then I was like, well, is this actually what I want to be doing? Why am I doing this? And it allowed me to, make different choices, right? Because now I'm making choices not from a place of lack, like I'm not enough, therefore I'm going to do this thing so I can prove to the world that I'm enough. I'm making choices like, what do I want to do? What is the thing that I actually want to do? What feels good to me? What lights me up? What's in my heart? Like, what do I have to give the world? Not in relationship or in reaction to something that happened to me as a child. That for me was ultimately the takeaway, or at least one of the takeaways from all my work in school.
Okay, so the realization was more of a leaping point, jumping point for better growth. It wasn't just like I had this realization, oh, poor me, and then you're stuck there. It allowed you to change in a better way.
Well, and then I could accept it. It's like, oh, this is what happened to me. It was painful. I didn't know. I mean, I was a little boy, right? And we forget. When we're men, we forget how vulnerable and innocent little children are, little boys are when we're 5 or 6 years old, and how much we long for our fathers, how much we need our daddies. When you watch those videos that get shared on Twitter or Instagram every once in a while of a little boy and, his daddy comes home from war or something, and you see that boy, leap into his father's arms. It's like we all cry in that moment because we all know that feeling of like wanting the father's love and missing our father and how much we need him. And that's and we don't get that when our dad's not around or he's not available to us. It's fucking devastating. And it impacts us in all kinds of subtle and not so subtle ways. So allowing ourselves to feel the pain that child experienced and in some sense liberate it allows us to accept what happened to us and then move on from it.
I wonder if the interpretation of how things are supposed to be, or the kind of idea of how things are supposed to be, could make the experience more difficult for the person than it has to be. For example, and I'm not saying what is right and what is wrong. I'm just saying, if there's this idea in the zeitgeist that the dad should be there all the time,
right,
then people are more predisposed to be like, well, the dad's supposed to be there all the time. My dad wasn't there all the time. And you guys kind of touched on this in Tate's interview, because, for example, little kids really respect superheroes, right? But superheroes would probably be the worst dads ever. They're never home. They're always flying off to do something else. So I think I kind of agreed with what Tate was saying about it shouldn't be the case that the father's attention is always unconditional, because if the kid, say the dad is there, he's around, but he's always outside doing carpentry work, but the kid is like, I don't want to do carpentry work. I want to play video games. Why doesn't my dad play video games with me? And then the kid's like, he feels like he's not getting the right attention, or he's not getting enough attention. So I guess I just mean to say, I think even the concept of unconditional love, I wonder if this expectation for an unconditional love could make a kid more, I don't know if the word is ungrateful, but or spoiled or something, of like, no matter what I do, no matter how much I piss off my parents and I act inappropriately, they're going to love me no matter what. Is that going to be good for the kid going forward?
No, I don't think that's good for the kid. I think there's probably a sweet spot, right, between, love and acceptance and discipline. And sometimes I think a father needs to be stern with his child sometime. Absolutely. And I think you have to teach the kid like this. The world is, a difficult place, and I'm a safe space for you. Like, I love you. I'm here for you. I got your back. I'm never going to leave you. Like, you're protected, and I have expectations of you. I think that probably feels good to the son, but that in and of itself is presence. Like, you're demonstrating in that place, you're demonstrating your love for the child. And I think Tate got that from his father. And I think that's what he felt, right? At the same time, two things could be true. I wanted more of my father, and I was hurt by my father. I was scared of my father, and that was painful. And there's a part of me that wanted it to be different. And maybe I have feelings about that. Okay. And that's what happened. And there was a lot of good that came from it. And maybe the reason that I'm here today and I am the man I am is because of all of that happened to me. So even my trauma in some way is a blessing. And I think that's a legitimate perspective. And I think that's a very powerful perspective. what I would argue, which I did argue to Andrew, was, well, yes, you don't have to give anything up. Like, I'm not trying to change your perspective. I'm just trying to widen it. I'm just trying to because maybe there's some things, like, you're looking at it in this way, and he made that statement, like, I had the perfect child, I had the perfect dad, everything, and it's true. And what I said to him is, like, it's also, it sounds like a rationalization, like, and that makes me a little suspicious that there's something you're avoiding, which is fine. So the strategy you developed is great. It's getting you all these things. I'm not asking you to give that up. I'm just wondering, are there other perspectives? Is there other things that you're not looking at that, if you looked at them, might be useful and helpful to you? Particularly, I mean, I think for every man, but particularly in the position that he's in, where I would argue he's extraordinarily vulnerable. I mean, this guy's putting himself out there in a big fucking way. You know what I mean? And he's like pointing at all the lies in the culture. I'm like, you want every fucking weapon, awareness, consciousness at your disposal, because any place you got a blind spot, they're going to find it. They're going to exploit it. They're going to fuck you.
I can definitely see how I had a perfect father. Sounds kind of like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, it's kind of, he was perfect, kind of thing. So I think it made sense that you dug into it. One of the things I also talked about is, like, the bar for trauma. That's kind of one of the things I think about. And if someone says, like, why are you harping on about trauma so much? And I'm like, well, if they use a different word, I probably wouldn't even be writing articles. If they didn't, because it sounds like a pathologization, they're pathologizing it. You might have someone, that's another thing that feels like happening nowadays. Instead of people just saying, I'm shy, say, I have social anxiety. It's like, do you really? You're just shy. Or I'm feeling depressed. It's like, whoa, that's a clinical condition. Are you sure you're depressed, or are you having a bad week, a bad month? And to people who genuinely are depressed, I'm not trying to take away from that, but there's kind of a bit of looseness with words nowadays, and I feel like words are pretty powerful. So I was watching Paul Conti. Have you seen Dr. Paul Conti? He was on a couple podcasts. Tim Ferriss, Andrew Huberman, and Rich Roll. They're all pretty big, over 1 million subscribers on YouTube. And he and Rich Roll were talking about the epidemic of trauma. And Paul Conti was saying something like, you can have trauma, or trauma will manifest into so many different conditions. There's so many different conditions that could be linked back to trauma, and how people can have trauma just from having a history of feeling less than another person or another group of people. So I guess he's talking about minorities, perhaps. But with that kind of framing, it's like, well, then maybe I have trauma because I'm not as rich as Andrew Tate or Elon Musk or Zuckerberg, right? So it's like the bar is a bit, I guess I wish there was a bit more fidelity with the word, more specificity, because one of the definitions he used was anything that overcomes your coping mechanisms is trauma. It's like, well, okay, fair enough.
Well, your coping mechanisms, I would say, when you were a child, like when you were undefended, when you were vulnerable, when you had no option but to stay in the situation that you are in, because you have to find a way to cope. And that becomes your adaptive strategy. And then you take that strategy out to life, and then you recreate it over and over and over again. And you have all this suffering and frustration. You don't understand why. That, to me, is what trauma is. But I totally agree with you. It's overused. I think I probably overuse it. I think there's all the labels and the pathologies. It's a problem. I mean, again, I start, people come in and I'm like, I start with, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, there's nothing wrong. You know what I mean? It's just, this is what life is. This is what happens, and we're just going to get you out of some distortions that you have, which is normal. You develop these defenses. It's normal. You had to do it, and they're not working for you. So let's try to figure it out. Because I think I think a lot of people, because going back to what you said, it's very attractive to be a victim, and if you've got a label to assign your feelings or a behavior that sounds somewhat medically certified, then you get to have that, and you feel special. There's something wrong with me is a kind of narcissism. I'm better than you is narcissism. I'm less than you is also narcissism. I'm special. I'm separate. I have this issue, and I need to be, treated special and act special. And listen, I'm understanding and sympathetic. I'm in some way, it's probably like everything, it's an overcorrection to an ignoring of the problem, like what you talked about with being shell-shocked. When people first saw it, they didn't, they thought it was an excuse. And so now we realize, well, no, actually it makes sense. If you're fucking in war and watching people killed and people are trying to shoot you, you probably have some shit going on in your head that needs some attention. But I think we've overcorrected. And so I think your instinct is right. I think what you're sharing through your Substack and other places is it's I think you're reacting to what you're seeing as a kind of a distortion, just a way that people are. There's something not honest about it. There's something a little fake. It's a little bullshitty about it, and I'm totally with you.
Right, and there's many aspects of therapy that I agree with. And I guess one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to make like a treatise of like, this is why no one should ever go to therapy. What it kind of reminds me of is part of the reason why I got into diet and health, because the narrative was you have to do a low fat, high carb diet, and that is the only way to be healthy. And I wasn't necessarily saying it's impossible to be healthy that way. I'm saying like, well, wait a minute. There's these other ways. You could do a ketogenic diet. You could do a low carb diet. You could do like a bodybuilder diet, or, so the idea is kind of say like, okay, this is the trauma perspective, or this is one perspective. This is one therapy perspective, but here's another one. What about this?
Yeah.
Let's take this. Yeah. And maybe I'm a little, at some point, I stopped worrying, like, do I have every single caveat in my writing? It's like, I'm never going to... Yeah, exactly. And even if I do, people are probably going to react regardless. So
no, I enjoy... Listen, there's a lot of comments on the video that were less sophisticated than your article, but we're pointing at the same thing. And I'm happy for the opportunity to answer to it, because I didn't spend any time answering to those comments on YouTube. So it's nice to kind of talk about it and to be asked in a way that's, they're good questions, and it forces me to think about it, and I do think about it, and I'm always talking to. I have one colleague in particular that I do workshops with. I'm always saying, are we full of shit? Do we have a blind spot? Or where are we not seeing something? Like, where are we in a lie? Like, what are we not understanding? Where's our own bias? I'm always trying to examine that. I have to. And so questions like this are, and interviews like this are really, really helpful for me.
I think that's probably the best kind of therapist, as opposed to someone who's like, I know exactly how it works, and this is the only way it works, and I know how every human brain works, something like that. Well,
there's I guess, because you're an interesting guy, you're a smart guy, and like there's a world in there, in the therapy world, at least in my world, right? Like in my workshops and the kind of frame, and you see it a little bit in the Tate interview, and it's an interesting world. Like there's things in there that are so fascinating. Like once you really understand how like people's minds work, but not just their minds, their energy, right? Like we have a kind of energetic imprint, and we move, we think, we talk in ways that are, so I'm kind of like, feel like I'm more like the dog whisperer. Like I'm looking at people's energy, and you can learn, and we can all learn to do this. You can learn to read it. I mean, we all read it all the time because we know that most communication is nonverbal, but you can really learn to read it. And like you can look at somebody, like if I really tuned into you, like, and you allowed it, like there has to be an agreement, like Tate agreed to it. He sat down, he opened up. And so he gave permission. And so then I'm turning it on. And that experience is really like, it's creative and it's alive and it's interesting and it's like a world of discovery. It's almost like, back in the day you sailed across the ocean or you tried to go to the moon. And now in some sense, like we're going inside and, you've done ayahuasca. So, like you have a sense of like, that's a fucking world. And there's information in there, and that world may be more real than this world. Like in some sense, like there's a deeper layer of reality. And I think that, the work that I do, I mean, it's therapy, but it's something else. Like I'm more consider myself, and I don't mean this but it's more like shamanism, what I'm doing. I'm trying to shake people out of this construct that they're in so they can see there's something else going on, and to help liberate and free them from the matrix that was created in their mind and body through their experiences in their childhood, but also through their experiences growing up in this culture at this time.
One of my things is not necessarily that therapy is bad or that it can't work for men, but more that if men take this approach of I'm going to do the kind of manly testosterone driven approach to problem solving of, okay, let me check that experience for now and keep working on my goals and make myself more satisfied about myself. I'm like, is that necessarily a bad thing? So that's one thing. But then going back to the energy thing, while I did criticize some of the feminine approaches to masculine issues, I do think that that is an interesting strength that women have, or it's a very feminine strength, this ability to read energies that I don't think most men understand. And I certainly couldn't understand until, what was I doing? I did LSD, and then I had this really strong feeling of like looking at all the people in the room, and they all had these different energies. And I was like, whoa, what the fuck? Is this what women are talking about when they say someone has an energy? I never knew that. It just sounded like some horoscope kind of crystal stuff. Yeah. But the more, let me see, as I've done more meditation, I felt like I have a little bit more access to that. And I feel like when it comes to energy reading and picking up on energies, women are kind of wizards at this from my perspective as someone who can't do it that well. So I'll give you an example. Just 2 nights ago, I met up with a friend in Osaka, and I hadn't seen him in years. And we went to the club. Things were going pretty well. We were interacting with this group of girls. At some point, I'm just kind of trying to like relax and dance around and, talk to them a little bit, talk to someone else, talk to them again. And then my friend, he was trying to strategize. And what he was saying made a lot of sense. He's like, okay, we got to go back and talk to them for a bit. And then we should talk to these women so we don't look too desperate. And then we should pause and do this. And I was like, stop. I need to just relax. I can't get into this strategization mindset because then it's going to shift my energy. And, and they're all wizards. So I got to like chill and just have the right, like fun, relaxed energy.
That's right.
Yeah. It's attractive. You're not putting a demand on the situation. and you're not trying to present yourself in a particular kind of way so that you'll win their approval, which is very unattractive. And they can feel that, right? It's like what people respond to is authenticity. You know, you feel it. You feel it in the body language. You feel it in the tone of voice. You see it on a person's face, and that's the whole game. And yeah, I think, which is presence, essentially. But getting all the way present is not always an easy thing.
When I first talked to you, we talked a little bit about ayahuasca and psychedelics, and I've done ayahuasca. That was it was like an interesting experience that revealed a lot of things to me, but it kind of like presented its own issues for me.
How many times did you do ayahuasca?
I drank 3 times.
3 times. Okay. Well, I've had extensive, I think I told you, I have extensive experience.
You did it like 50 times or something like that?
At least, yeah. I mean, I lived with an ayahuasca shaman. I mean, I was in the whole community. I was deep in it. So
I want to ask you about that. But one of the things that got me thinking about therapy was kind of how ayahuasca worked on me. Was it's revealed a lot of things to me, but then it dug up its own problems of like it's quite interesting. I had this. And now that I think about it, it could potentially be all completely fabricated and have nothing to actually do with my life situation. Because basically what happened was I was sitting there, I was sitting on the sleeping bag, sitting upright, letting the ayahuasca do its thing. And then I started to feel, the sequence of events might be wrong, but I was starting to feel this kind of like hand on my head, like pushing me to try and look at something that I didn't want to look at. That was over here. And it's like, look at that thing. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Until I started to hear this noise. It sounded like crescendoing on some cymbals, like shh. And then right when it did the final shh noise, I looked to my left and I saw this giant demon-looking thing that was basically too dark to really see any of its features, other than the fact that its entire body was covered in these really bright eyes looking at me. So I see this demon thing. I'm like, whoa, what is that? And then I look down on the floor, and then there's this pit. It was like really dark, but I could tell it was this gigantic, very, very deep pit. And it felt like I could hear these kind of like wailing cries of just some being suffering down there. And so this hand was trying to push me into the pit, like, hey, you need to go in there. And I was like, I do not need to go in there. And so I just like resisted the push to go in there. And I had heard one time that the more you resist the experience, the longer the trip will go. And that trip went until like 5 a.m. So it was like a 9-hour trip. It was just constant, and it was really quite agonizing, and I could feel me like dipping into ego death and dipping out of it and going back into it. And
where's the money, Lebowski?
He's like, where's the money, Lebowski? And he's like dunking his head in the toilet.
Yeah.
It was like that, but each dunk in the toilet was like complete dissolution and just having ego death and then pulling back out and going back in and going back out. And so what I came out with that, when I came out of that, and then for a while, whenever I would think about the experience, I just kind of felt like I failed. And I felt like there was a challenge presented to me and I didn't take the challenge, and I should have taken the challenge, but I lost the chance. I'm no longer in Costa Rica, and I guess I got to go back to Peru, Costa Rica so I can go back and take the challenge and stop being a failure. And it was simply sourced from the ayahuasca experience. It didn't make me think of like, oh, there was this time in my life when I avoided this, or this is time in my life I avoided this. At least I was never able to identify something, but it just kind of felt to me like I realized there was maybe it was a metaphor for something, There's a challenge I never took. I never jumped in, and I feel like a failure, but I still don't know what it was. The only thing I know is I had this hallucination. I didn't go into the pit, and then I felt like a failure. Now that has resolved, but it was for like a little, maybe like 2 months afterward.
Well, I have questions.
Please go ahead.
Well, your interpretation that you're a failure is interesting to me, because another interpretation might have been you got shown something and you're not ready for it yet. I mean, how do you feel when you think about that frame as opposed to I failed. I had this opportunity, I didn't take it? Because that sounds like a story. And I wonder where that story comes from and why you immediately went there. I think that would be my line of questioning.
That makes a lot of sense. The reason I interpreted it that way is like I came all this way to learn whatever I'm supposed to learn here. And then I was presented with this, like you said, something I wasn't ready for. Right. And so it's like, oh, I came all this way to get challenged, and then I ran away from the challenge. So that's where the source of the feeling of failure in response to that came from.
Well, that's your interpretation, but that's your mind interpreting what happened, right? And so you want to be careful about that. I mean, your mind is interpreting that event, and the feeling you get from that interpretation is not a good one. I'm a failure. I did something wrong. I'm weak, whatever. And so I would challenge that interpretation because it's not useful. It's not. I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's accurate. I think, and you also made a decision. You said, I don't want to go in there. Okay. You don't have to. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Like ayahuasca and the world and whatever it is, what intelligence, God, it's not concerned. There's no right or wrong. It's like, here's a thing, you can take it or not. It doesn't matter. Either way, you're going to, it's going to ultimately unfold somehow for you in a way that you're going to get the lesson you need to get. So there's never a right or wrong. You can't fail. And the idea that you can, I think, is the distortion. It's the same with therapy, but you can't do something wrong in an ayahuasca ceremony. You can only reflect on it, what happened. Are you hard on yourself?
I suppose. I guess it depends on the domain, or depends on what it is. Right. I would say I'm less hard on myself now compared to most of the change happened when I did some really deep meditation. So I would say probably in the past I was harder on myself than I am now, if that gives you some perspective.
Yeah. And you started why did you start meditating?
So this is a long story, but basically when I was a kid, my parents were really into Zen Buddhism. And so I didn't like the sitting aspect. I didn't really like too many of the stories that we would hear about from the Zen books, but I did hear about the concept of enlightenment. And this sounded like a superpower. These guys in this story, it's like they found the radioactive spider that turned them into Spider-Man. But, it's enlightenment, and basically you're, impervious to suffering. That sounds awesome. But I would hear the Zen stories about how enlightenment was attained, and it would be some cryptic story about this monk who had been meditating for 40 years in search of enlightenment. He never got it until he was sweeping the temple one day, and then he became enlightened as he brushed the last leaf. And I was like, okay, that doesn't tell me how to get it. So I forgot about that for a long time until a friend told me about these people who were actually honestly trying to get enlightened, like rational, non-crazy people thinking that enlightenment was a real thing, and they're trying to do it. So I started digging into it, and I found that there's all these different traditions of Buddhism that are not just Zen, and they have these maps for how to get to enlightenment, like very specific. Like you do this meditation technique, you experience this, you experience this. And then there's 4 stages of enlightenment. At the first stage, this happens. At the second stage, this happens. So it's all really specific and had these different techniques you're supposed to do for it. And then I got interested in the concept. It no longer sounded, at least went from a fairy tale to something that could be confirmed, let's say. Say like, okay, well, I could do the technique. Then if nothing happens, then nothing happens and maybe it's not real. So honestly, I started sitting to see if I could see like the first step in the ladder. Obviously, I wasn't thinking I'm going to get quote unquote enlightened or awakened just by doing a meditation retreat. But I was thinking like maybe I could go in there and then experience that first little milestone of whatever they say is going to happen on the path. Like, oh, you'll have this feeling in your body and you feel your body dissolve. And so really it was that. But if I'm to be honest, I thought maybe I can experience these stages, but also like something good will happen for me. Maybe I'll procrastinate less, or I'll be a less emotionally reactive person, or things won't bother me as much, something like that.
You still meditate?
Only when I feel the need to. It's gotten to the point where I don't lose so much by not meditating regularly, so I can meditate less regularly. You
did enough that it's in you.
So, yes, for some reason it's into me to some degree.
I don't want to, well, I'm aware that, my computer's dying and I don't want to pry so much. I don't want to pry, but I am curious about, I don't know. I would want to know more. Maybe we can do another one, like, because this was kind of a lot about me. But I would be interested if you're willing, like in a way has a good intention, like not trying to, I don't know, get anywhere. Just to kind of, just to ask you questions to kind of explore your psyche and just see what happens, and maybe show you a little bit of deeper into my world or my perspective. And just like often what I say to people, and I think I said it to Tate, it's like, just try this on. Just see what it's like to look at it from over here, and you can go right back, but just see what happens if you just do that. Maybe there's information for you there. Maybe there's not. Maybe you like it. Maybe you don't. I don't know, but check it out and see what happens.
I was going to say, honestly, I'm not averse to the prying at all. But yeah, it is kind of bad timing. You're on like 15%, I guess, about now.
Yeah, I'm on 9%. I guess I got to get I don't know what to do about this problem, because I've been doing a lot more of these interviews, but no, this is good. It gives us an opportunity to talk again when the time is right.
One of the things I said was that I don't think it's right to suggest to someone that they can't psychoanalyze themselves, but you can always get a different perspective from someone who has so much experience seeing how all these different people's minds work. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be like, this is how your mind works. It's like, well, here's what I'm seeing. What do you think? So I am genuinely interested in your prying.
Exactly. You'll know if things will land or they won't land. Like, and there's truth. When you hear truth, it hits you. Like you kind of, now maybe there's some truth you're not like, you're just gonna like, I'm not ready for that. Like, and that's also fine. That's also totally fine. Not everybody, it takes time, and not everybody, we're not getting to the bottom of it in this lifetime. It's not a thing. Like maybe for these people who are going to do this meditation, I think enlightenment, I think there's moments of enlightenment. I think we've all had it, making love or something, playing hockey or basketball or staring at a sunset, like dancing. We're lost in that moment. I remember, in that documentary with Michael Jordan on Netflix, he, after one of the championships, he was sitting in the hotel bar at the piano, and the trophy was on, and he was pointing at himself. He's like, I'm the Buddha. And it was like, yeah, you are the Buddha. Like that he had achieved enlightenment, like not in the way that we think, but he was pure. Like he was like a lion on the savannah. Like that lion is enlightened, you know? So I think like it does exist, but it exists in all kinds of different ways. And, but also it's fleeting for most of us. And I think it's just, I don't know, it's just the acceptance of that. It's the acceptance of that. We have these moments and then we're back in doubt and fear and questioning and that's okay too. That's all, it's all part of it. And there's no end, there's no solution. We're just playing with life and it's an endless game.
Right. And a quick comment on what you were saying about seeing that you experience a truth and you accept it, or you experience something and you say, I don't accept that now. That can be valuable for you. It was kind of like when you were saying you went to the school and you felt like everyone's too feminized. So even just realizing that everyone's too feminized, you didn't accept just that, but it made you come to some other realization, right?
Exactly. All paths lead home if you're willing to follow them there. And, you know, people in my workshops all the time, like stuff's coming up. It's like, oh, where should we start? And like, it doesn't matter. It's all going to one place. We can start anywhere. It's all coming ultimately to the same place. So, hey, Joseph, appreciate you, man, so much. It's a great conversation. Thank you to Nathaniel for suggesting that I reach out to you. And yeah, I'd love to do it again. And yeah, maybe we can dig into your psychology a little bit and your work and everything that you're doing, because you're making a big contribution to the world. Your videos are amazing. Your writing is great. So I'm happy to be on here with you, because I'm a big fan.
Appreciate it, David. Yeah, and this was really fun. This was really interesting. I think you have a bunch of insight to share, and which is why we should do this again.
Definitely.
Hey, just real quick, where can we direct everyone? Like, you're on YouTube, you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter. Yeah,
I mean, I guess Instagram, David Sutcliffe 33, but my website, it's all there, davidsutcliffe.com. And yeah, maybe you can just leave it in the show notes, davidsutcliffe.com, and you can find, everything that I'm up to it's all there, and all my social media. But yeah, appreciate you.